General Motors is cutting 1,200 jobs at its Detroit electric vehicle plant.
The Detroit News says GM is downsizing.
Inside GM's technical departments, engineers had been warning about a fatal flaw, a problem buried deep in the company's line of V8 engines. A defect in the system designed to save fuel, known as active fuel management, that instead destroyed engines from within. Metal shavings in the oil, clogged passages, starving bearings, the kind of failure that no oil change could prevent. The company allegedly launched a secret internal program to manage perception. Dealers were instructed to tell customers their engines failed because of improper maintenance. Technical bulletins were rewritten, warranty claims were quietly denied, and somewhere in Detroit's boardrooms, executives calculated that paying for lawsuits would be cheaper than repairing the truth. Families stranded on highways, veterans losing their only vehicle, mechanics baffled by engines that looked brand new yet were dead inside. By the time the public caught on, the damage was done. Used GM trucks and SUVs lost their value overnight. Independent experts began investigating, and when the lawsuits came, the numbers were staggering. Billions in potential damages. GM eventually agreed to pay $888 million, but for many, it wasn't enough. The betrayal ran deeper than money. Behind closed doors, the company allegedly changed the recommended engine oil to thicker, cheaper blends, not to protect customers, but to protect itself. New filler caps were printed, service manuals quietly updated. The goal? Make the engine survive just long enough to outlast the warranty. And as all this happened, GM's marketing teams continued to boast about record reliability, record sales, record trust. They built a wall of silence while bloggers and journalists who spoke out received threats, takedown offers, even bribes, disguised as service vouchers. Tonight, we open the files that GM never wanted you to see. We'll follow the paper trail, the engineers, the whistleblowers, and the ordinary drivers caught in a billion-dollar cover-up. This is the untold story of how one of America's biggest automakers gambled with trust, lost control, and left a stain on its legacy that no oil change can wash away. It began, as so many scandals do, with something small. An odd noise, a flickering warning light, an engine that died for no apparent reason. At first, nobody wanted to believe that something could be wrong with a GM V8. After all, this engine wasn't just a machine. It was an American symbol, the sound of freedom on the open road, the heartbeat of the country's biggest automaker. For decades, GM's V8 engines had powered everything from family SUVs to police cruisers, earning a reputation for power, durability, and tradition. But around 2014, a different kind of story began spreading quietly across forums and repair shops. Owners of brand new trucks and SUVs were complaining about sudden engine failures, sometimes at just 20,000 miles. At first, the company's representatives dismissed it all as coincidence. A few isolated incidents, they said. Mechanics disagreed. They saw the same symptoms repeating with uncanny precision. Engines stalling in traffic, misfires under light load, mysterious drops in oil pressure. One technician from Texas claimed he had replaced 4 identical V8 engines in the same week, all with metal shavings in the oil and identical scoring on the cylinder walls. It looked like someone had poured sand into them, he told an independent reporter later. And GM told us to write customer neglect on every warranty form. As the number of complaints grew, online communities of frustrated owners began compiling data. They mapped failures by VIN, location, and production year. A pattern emerged. The vast majority of cases involved engines equipped with GM's active fuel management, AFM system, a feature designed to improve fuel economy by deactivating half the cylinders during light driving. The technology was clever on paper, but in reality it caused unpredictable oil flow, leading to lubrication issues and premature wear. Internal GM engineers reportedly flagged these risks during early testing, but their warnings were ignored. In one leaked memo from 2015, a project engineer named J.L. wrote, "We're running on the edge of tolerance. Any deviation in oil quality could cause bearing failure within 30,000 miles." The email was marked "for internal review only" and buried in a folder labeled "cost optimization." Dealers began to notice too. A former service manager in Ohio later admitted that GM quietly sent them internal service newsletters instructing how to handle customers with AFM complaints. The documents encouraged technicians to check for customer maintenance lapses before approving any warranty replacement. Essentially, they were told to find an excuse, any excuse, to deny coverage. Some dealers even received incentives for keeping warranty claims below certain thresholds. One anonymous GM employee compared the policy to an oil-soaked shell game, where the company constantly shifted responsibility away from itself. For customers, the situation felt surreal. They bought vehicles under slogans like "Built to Last" and "American Power," only to have their engines die in the middle of intersections. On social media, videos of seized V8s went viral, showing clean, new-looking engines with destroyed internals. Owners shared stories of losing thousands on repairs, only to be told that the issue was improper driving style or incorrect oil usage. Some even claimed dealership employees whispered that they weren't allowed to speak openly about the failures. To most Americans, it still looked like business as usual, but under the surface, something had cracked. For the first time in decades, ordinary drivers began to question the myth of the GM V8, the symbol of reliability their fathers and grandfathers swore by. The first point of failure wasn't mechanical, it was moral. When the engine started breaking, so did the illusion that the world's largest automaker was still driven by integrity. And in that sense, the GM V8 scandal wasn't just about oil, metal, and pistons. It was about trust, and how easily it can vanish when power becomes more important than truth. Inside the towering glass headquarters of General Motors in Detroit, the atmosphere in 2015 was tense but deceptively calm. On the surface, the company was thriving, record profits, rising stock prices, and glowing press releases celebrating the new era of efficiency. Yet behind closed doors, executives were facing reports that painted a much darker picture. Internal testing teams had confirmed what independent mechanics and angry customers were already suspecting. GM's latest generation of V8 engines, fitted with the much publicized active fuel management system, were failing at alarming rates. Bearings were seizing, pistons were scarring, oil passages were clogging, and warranty claims were skyrocketing. Engineers inside the powertrain division circulated memos detailing potential causes and possible fixes, but none of those documents ever reached the public. Instead, a series of high-level meetings quietly shifted the company's focus from solving the issue to managing the fallout. One internal presentation titled "Containment Strategy: V8 AFM Failures" proposed a chilling solution: reframe the issue as consumer maintenance error. It recommended rewriting service manuals to emphasize the importance of oil change intervals and customer vigilance, subtly implying that the cause of engine failure lay not in the design, but in the driver's neglect. Within weeks, GM's corporate communications department sent new technical bulletins to dealerships across North America. These bulletins, later leaked to journalists, contained revised diagnostic procedures that effectively discouraged technicians from identifying AFM malfunctions. Instead, they were to check oil viscosity, driving habits, and aftermarket modifications first, a checklist designed to deflect blame. So, the decision was made to stay quiet. Instead of issuing a recall, GM launched what insiders called Phase Zero, a plan to control information flow. Service departments received instructions to minimize written correspondence about engine failures, using verbal communication whenever possible. Customer complaints were to be handled on a case-by-case basis with strict oversight from regional managers. Some dealerships were even offered incentives, unofficial bonuses, for reducing the number of official warranty claims. A confidential slide deck from late 2016, titled "Customer Response Optimization," recommended offering goodwill discounts to particularly vocal owners in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. It was damage control disguised as customer service. The public relations team was equally busy. They coordinated with marketing executives to maintain a steady stream of positive news, record truck sales, awards for innovation, and new eco-friendly product launches. The goal was distraction. In one leaked email chain between PR managers, a senior communications officer wrote, "We can't let the reliability narrative collapse. Keep the spotlight on our hybrid initiatives." At the same time, media liaisons were instructed to steer journalists away from technical inquiries, redirecting them to approved narratives. Independent reporters who pressed too hard were quietly blacklisted from press events. The board knew the strategy was risky, but they gambled on one assumption: most engines would survive just long enough to outlast their warranties. For the accountants, it was a simple equation. Fixing the problem would cost billions. Ignoring it might only cost hundreds of millions in settlements later. In the language of corporate calculus, denial was cheaper than honesty. Some managers even referred to the AFM defect as the invisible recall, a silent issue managed internally through selective repairs rather than public admission. To enforce the silence, GM's legal department began issuing internal confidentiality reminders. Engineers were warned that discussing unverified performance concerns outside the company could result in termination or litigation. Whistleblower hotlines were quietly rerouted to compliance departments, where complaints were reviewed and often dismissed, before reaching external regulators. By the end of 2017, GM's internal data showed that failure rates for affected engines had tripled, but public awareness remained low. The company congratulated itself on effective perception control. Yet in reality, the truth was beginning to leak. Mechanics posted photos of shredded camshafts on online forums, customers shared warranty denial letters, and investigative journalists began tracing patterns across states. Still, GM refused to issue a recall or acknowledge a systemic problem. The decision to suppress the truth was no longer just a business strategy. It had become company culture. Every department, from engineering to public relations, was now part of a coordinated effort to keep the story buried, and as the engines kept failing, the gap between GM's public image and internal reality grew wider with every mile driven. By 2018, the problem had evolved beyond the walls of GM's testing facilities and dealership service bays. What had once been an internal embarrassment was now a national issue, spreading through consumer reports, legal filings, and viral online posts. The engines were failing in alarming numbers, often just outside warranty coverage. For those who had followed the early whispers, the technical cause was no longer a mystery. The flawed active fuel management system, the clogged oil passages, the bearing failures. But what truly shocked the public wasn't the mechanical weakness of the V8. It was the revelation of how deliberately the company had worked to disguise it. By 2019, attorneys began connecting the dots. Dozens of law firms across the U.S. formed a coalition to pursue a class action lawsuit on behalf of GM owners. The discovery process unearthed damning internal documents, testing reports, corporate emails, and one PowerPoint presentation that explicitly referred to the failure zone between 55,000 and 75,000 miles as statistically tolerable. That single phrase became a turning point in the narrative. It was no longer about defective parts, it was about deliberate negligence. GM's lawyers fought to keep the materials sealed, arguing that releasing them would confuse the public. But the courts disagreed, and within months, excerpts were circulating across news outlets and social media. The market began to react. Used car prices for affected GM trucks plummeted. Auction houses reported an abrupt decline in resale values, sometimes by as much as 25%. Lenders adjusted residual values on leases, while fleet operators quietly phased out GM vehicles from their inventories. Insurance companies recalculated risk factors, raising premiums for specific models. Dealers, once loyal to the brand, grew frustrated as their service departments filled with angry customers demanding answers. "We're fixing engines that shouldn't exist," one dealership manager admitted anonymously. "And every time we do, GM pretends it's the first they've heard of it." Competitors seized the opportunity. Ford launched a campaign emphasizing engine integrity you can count on, while Ram introduced extended warranties at no extra cost. Even Toyota subtly referenced lasting performance, no excuses in its advertising. The message across the industry was unified. Reliability sells, and GM had squandered its claim to it. By 2021, GM's internal culture was beginning to fracture. Morale among engineers plummeted as management doubled down on denial. Some employees leaked additional documents, including internal surveys revealing that over 60% of technical staff believed the company had compromised ethical standards in its handling of the V8 issue. A whistleblower from the Lansing engine plant revealed that efficiency quotas had led to skipped inspections during assembly, further compounding the failures. He described an atmosphere of fear, supervisors reminding workers that delays cost bonuses and that rework reports go straight to Detroit externally. GM tried to pivot toward the future, pouring resources into its electric vehicle program. Press conferences showcased a new vision and commitment to sustainability. But beneath the optimistic branding, the ghost of the V8 scandal lingered. Analysts noted that the company's stock volatility increased every time a new article revisited the lawsuits or customer complaints. Trust, once GM's strongest currency, had become its most fragile.
In small towns across the Midwest, however, the story wasn't about public relations or lawsuits. It was about people whose trucks sat broken in driveways, reminders of promises unkept. Independent repair shops became hubs of frustrated owners sharing stories, swapping parts, and posting photos online. Many of these grassroots communities evolved into advocacy groups, pushing for stronger consumer protection laws and greater transparency from automakers. Some of the most vocal advocates were former GM technicians who could no longer stomach the company's silence. By the end of 2022, GM had spent millions trying to rebuild its image. But while advertising could change perception, it couldn't erase the facts. The scandal had exposed a pattern. A willingness to place quarterly profits above engineering integrity. And once that truth was visible, no settlement could bury it again. The V8 engines that once symbolized American power had become evidence of corporate decay. The roar that once inspired confidence now carried a different echo, one of warning, not pride. For the automotive world, the lesson was brutal but clear. When trust breaks, it doesn't just dent a brand, it dismantles a legacy. GM's V8 engines were meant to drive America forward, but instead, they left the company staring in the rearview mirror, haunted by the sound of an empire misfiring on its own deception. When the noise finally settled, the lawsuits, the press conferences, the denials, and the settlements, what remained was something deeper and more lasting than financial loss. The GM V8 scandal had exposed a truth about modern industry that no company wanted to face. That in the race for efficiency, profit, and perception, the human element had been left behind. The lesson wasn't just about engines or oil, but about trust, how easily it can be traded, how quickly it evaporates, and how impossible it is to fully restore once it's gone. In the years following the public reckoning, GM worked feverishly to reinvent itself. Executives launched what they called Project Horizon, a sweeping internal reform plan designed to restore engineering integrity. They brought in consultants, created ethics boards, and even restructured entire departments under a new corporate mantra: safety, transparency, progress. Press releases spoke of a new era of accountability, but inside the company, many employees saw it differently. One veteran engineer described it as a cosmetic cleanup, painting over the cracks without rebuilding the foundation. A leaked internal survey from 2023 revealed that only 42% of GM's engineering staff believed the company had truly learned from its mistakes. The rest thought it was just waiting for the public to forget. Outside GM's walls, the impact was harder to erase. Consumer confidence in the brand hit historic lows. Surveys showed that nearly half of former GM owners who replaced their vehicles during or after the scandal switched to competitors, many saying they would never return. The phrase GM reliability became a sarcastic shorthand among truck owners, appearing in online forums as a kind of dark joke. Insurance companies continued to flag certain GM V8 models as high risk for premature mechanical failure, even years after production changes had been made. Dealerships in rural regions, once fiercely loyal to the brand, began prioritizing other manufacturers. Some quietly removed GM signage altogether, citing market alignment. And yet, the broader lesson extended far beyond one company. The scandal triggered a wave of self-examination across the automotive world. Ford, Stellantis, Toyota, all of them launched internal reviews of how their own engineering and quality assurance departments handled potential defects. Regulators began pushing for stricter disclosure requirements for mechanical failures and for whistleblower protections inside the industry. Universities added case studies about the GM V8 crisis to their business ethics courses, analyzing how small compromises, shaving costs here, ignoring warnings there, can cascade into billion-dollar disasters. But the most profound change was cultural. The GM scandal became a symbol of the growing rift between corporate ambition and consumer trust. People no longer saw automakers as patriotic icons of craftsmanship, but as sprawling corporations capable of moral blindness. The scandal didn't just damage GM's image, it fractured the mythology of American automotive infallibility. For decades, Made in Detroit had meant durability, pride, and grit. Now, for many, it evoked images of executives hiding behind legal statements, while workers and customers bore the consequences of their decisions.